Well, of course, the big story was the bomb that dropped this morning. The first indictments are in from Special Counsel Robert Mueller. And there's some big fish, including the former campaign chairman for President Donald Trump, Paul Manafort, and his protege, Rick Gates, indicted on 12 different charges, including, and the one that's just tough to read, conspiracy against the United States. Essentially, what the Mueller probe is accusing Paul Manafort of is being basically a traitor. Essentially being an unregistered, undisclosed agent of a hostile foreign government, and then doing everything up to the point of laundering up to $20 million to hide that disclosure, to hide who he really was and who he was really working for from his own country. Now, he's not accused of treason. But where I come from, if you're working for a hostile foreign government and you do everything possible to not disclose that from your own government, what do you guys call that? At least we call it shady. Now, my take on this, I noticed this morning, is virtually different than everybody else's in conservative media, even people who often agree with where I'm coming from when it comes to Donald Trump. And I want to open up the show today explaining why. Now, I could be wrong. In fact, you might hear some contrarian opinions from the other members of this program in a few moments. But I want to lay out for you where I'm coming from, because while I was wrong about the election last year, everything I have said about this probe so far has been correct. From the beginning, I said, don't appoint a special counsel. Once you do, you never put the genie back in the bottle, as we learned under Lawrence Walsh and Ken Starr. We have a Congress. They have full subpoena power, the full force and credit of the United States government. They can put all of this on television, disclose it all. Democrats can do their cross-examining, Republicans can do their defense, and vice versa. And we can all watch on TV as the jury or online and make up our own minds of what really went on here. I warn that once this happened, no matter who the counsel was, the jurisdiction would expand. That has happened. I also warned that once this happened, somebody would be indicted. Probably multiple people would be indicted. That has also happened. So everything I have said about this investigation so far has been true, including there's only two possible outcomes here. One outcome is that the Trump people openly were working with Russia to infiltrate our election for their own benefit. The other being they were essentially a mark from the Russian government, and they placed people like Mike Flynn and Paul Manafort within the Trump infrastructure in order to work the campaign on Russia's behalf. We don't know yet which of those narratives the Mueller probe will conclude with, but they're the only two possible ones. And there's only two groups of big fish. Mueller could either decide that Manafort and Flynn is the top of the food chain here, or the Trumps themselves are. We don't really know yet how that's all going to turn out. So I wanted to go through my record of analyzing this before I lay out for you why my opinion on this is a lot different than everybody else's. See, what I think is happening here is we are conflating what is a criminal process with what's a political one, and what's a political process with what is a criminal one. And I think those that are shilling for Donald Trump right now in the media, believing that, hey, he didn't mention, Mueller never mentioned the Trump campaign in his indictment, they don't understand. That's not good news. And the reason why it's not good news is it provides no platform to counterattack Mueller now. All weekend long, what was the story? How's Trump going to fire Mueller? When's he going to fire Mueller? What is not being talked about right now? No one is talking about firing Mueller. And the reason why is, in my view, I think Mueller has outwitted Trump's political machine. You have to understand, when you were the director of the FBI, first of all, you don't rise to that position without understanding politics. You don't hold it longer than anybody else other than the guy whose name is on the building, J. Edgar Hoover himself, without understanding politics. This is a guy that had to navigate politics, prosecuting Islamic extremists in an era of Islam, the great and wondrous peaceful religion. You don't last through the entire George W. Bush presidency and the early years of the Obama one if you don't understand politics. By not mentioning Trump in his indictment, or the Trump campaign, Mueller took all of the political wind out of the anti-Mueller sails. There is no place to Ken Starr him, no place to attack him, no place to go after him, no platform by which to go after him. And this will allow Mr. Mueller a wide-ranging latitude over the next weeks and months to continue this investigation. Because by firing Mueller now, with no mention of the Trump campaign in the indictment, it actually further implicates Trump for obstruction. And that's where I want to pause for just a moment. See, what a lot of people have been saying since the story came out that it turns out the Democrats were colluding with Russia too, is, well, you know what, if Trump wasn't colluding with the Russians and the Democrats were, then what's the point of the Mueller probe? Russian collusion has never been the point of the Mueller probe. I want to repeat this, because a lot of very smart people, including people I like and respect a lot, are repeating this talking point, and it's false. Russian collusion was not the launching point for the Mueller probe. I want to go through the timeline one more time. Step 1, James Comey is fired. Step 2, Trump is accused of obstructing justice by Democrats and the media, I repeat myself, by firing Comey, who was investigating Russian collusion. Step 3, the Trump White House produces a narrative which says acting Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who's the deputy AG, and he was acting as the head in the Russian collusion case. Why? Because real Attorney General Jeff Sessions recused himself back in January, remember. All right? So the acting head now, Rod Rosenstein, is running the Justice Department. Acting head of the Justice Department, Rod Rosenstein, according to the Trump White House, did a review, upon taking the job, did a review of Comey's performance and recommended removing Comey as head of the FBI, and that the president acted on the recommendation of Mr. Rosenstein. Not too long after that narrative was crafted, the president called Lester Holt of NBC News, invited him to the White House for an exclusive interview, and in that interview he went all Nathan Jessup and a few good men and said, no, I ordered the code red on Comey. And he even went so far as to say, even if Rosenstein had not recommended Comey's firing, President Trump said, I would have done it anyway. The very next day, Rod Rosenstein then recused himself at Justice. Why? Because the president, by virtue of that interview, made Rod Rosenstein either an accessory or witness to an obstruction of justice investigation. And since Jeff Sessions has now been recused, the Assistant Attorney General has now recused himself as well. There is nobody at Justice to helm this investigation, which means the very next day after Rosenstein recused himself, what occurred? Robert Mueller was appointed the special counsel. Robert Mueller was appointed the special counsel not primarily to investigate Russian collusion, guys, but primarily to investigate whether the president committed obstruction of justice by firing James Comey. That's the point most people, including really smart ones, keep missing here. If you don't understand that part, if you don't get that point, then the rest of what I'm going to say over the next few minutes will make no sense at all. Because you're right. If Mueller's primary mandate is investigating Russian collusion, and now, courtesy of all people, the Washington Post, we have evidence of Hillary and the Democrats engaging in Russian collusion, then it all looks like a political witch hunt. Except that wasn't what launched the Mueller probe. Obstruction of justice was. That's been the temptation against firing Comey, or firing, in this case, Mueller, all along, was Trump opening himself up to an obstruction charge. That's why Trey Gowdy was on TV over the weekend, saying, I'm one of the last Republicans left, urging the president not to do this. It's a bad idea. Why? Because what was Trey Gowdy before he came to the Congress, folks? What was he? He was a prosecutor. Because Trey Gowdy understands Mueller was not launched to go after Russian collusion. He was launched to go after obstruction of justice. Now let's continue laying this out. Trump, at this point, in my view, the president should follow Andrew McCarthy's advice at National Review, another former federal prosecutor. Andrew McCarthy is recommending that Trump release all the FISA information, release the warrants, release the surveillance data, put it all out there. Because that is one way that he can exonerate himself. In fact, it might even be the only way. Now, if you had the power to declassify information that would exonerate you, would you not do it? I would. Now, Steve, why would that exonerate Trump? Well, because if nothing is in there, if there's nothing in that surveillance data, if there's nothing credible in those FISA warrants that demonstrate clear collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, then guess what? You can't obstruct justice when you didn't commit a crime in the first place. That's why. It renders this entire thing null and void. Not to mention, if what Trump is alleging the Democrats did to him is true, then this would absolutely turn the tables on them. We would have the warrants, we would have the surveillance data, we would find out they did this for partisan purposes. That is, if that's what's in that data. As I've told you from day one when the president made this allegation, he has ultimate power to declassify things. He can declassify anything he wants at any point. Didn't we just learn that last week with the JFK files, which had been classified for over 50 years? He declassified those, well, at least most of them. He can declassify the FISA warrants. He can declassify every data point, every piece of surveillance tape. If it exonerates him, nothing is stopping him from doing that tomorrow, which would put almost all the air out of these sails overnight. So I ask again, if you had the means to exonerate yourself, why wouldn't you do so? See, what's happened here as I go back to the very first point I made. People are seeing this politically when they should be seeing it criminally, and they're seeing it criminally when they should be seeing it politically. This was not a win today for Team Trump. In my view, this was a chess move. This is when you decide not to call check on somebody because you think it's possible in the next few steps you might have checkmate. So you don't really let them know where you're at. The Mueller probe, in my view, has inflicted maximum political damage possible without opening itself up to reprisal. Robert Mueller is not John Podesta, whose password is password. This is a guy who puts the Gambino crime family and Enron behind bars. This is not a bit player. This is not Trump going to war with TMZ or Wolf Blitzed. This is a whole different ballgame. Whole different ballgame. And at the very least, here's what we learned today. President Trump doesn't hire the best people. This idea that, well, Steve, this all happened before he became Trump's campaign chairman. You know, I remember when the Clintons tried this defense with Whitewater. Some of you might not be old enough to remember. That was the failed money laundering land scheme they attempted in Arkansas, the get-rich-quick scheme that was a total scam. That was their defense, too. Well, this happened before we came to the White House. You know, we didn't buy that then. What would we say if a Democratic presidential candidate made his campaign chairman someone who was charged by one of the most decorated federal prosecutors in modern American history with conspiracy against the United States of America? What would we be saying right now? And let me add one more thing. I worked for the Cruz campaign during the 2016 cycle. One of my best friends, Brian English, was hired by the Cruz campaign partially on my recommendation initially. The vetting process Brian English had to go through to run their Iowa caucus campaign, guys, lasted weeks. Interviews, questions. I went through the exact same thing. I'm a public figure. Just not a A-list celebrity, but I'm a public figure. My work, my record is a matter of record. I went through weeks and months of discussions, vettings, just the same. You mean to tell me they didn't do that with the guy running the entire presidential campaign? So to me, you have one of two options here. They are beyond nitwits, beyond nincompoops, beyond shallow, just beyond fools, that they let someone into their vast family empire that they did not vet. They had no idea was this shady or had this kind of baggage. Or another alternative, probably no one even wants to consider.